In this screencast, we're going to go over Chapter 6, Section 2, Changes in the Market Equilibrium. At the end of this lesson, students will be able to 1. Describe how prices change in the market, 2. Explain how a market reacts to a change in supply or demand by moving to a new equilibrium. Let's go ahead and get started. First, we're going to talk about shifts in supply. I want you guys to rethink about what we covered in Chapter 5. In Chapter 5, we discuss exactly how a shift in supply looks. When there's a shift in supply, you're either going to have movement to the right or movement to the left, depending on if it's an increase in supply or a decrease in supply. The important thing I want you to remember is that when you have a shift in supply, just like a shift in demand, there is going to be an entirely new supply and demand schedule added to your graph. You're going to have your original S1 supply curve and your new S2 supply curve. That is important for you guys to remember because you're going to be doing the exact same thing with supply and demand curves and shifts in either the supply or the demand curve. Once you have that shift, once you create that second supply curve, that's going to give you a new intercept where your supply and your demand curve meet to create equilibrium. So now that I touched on that, let's go ahead and move forward, but I want to make sure you guys had that foundational framework. Since markets move towards equilibrium, a change in supply will lead the market to a new equilibrium. Once you shift to the right or to the left, you are going to see a new intercept where supply and demand meet. That new intercept is going to be your new equilibrium. I have examples represented in graph form in the next, not the next slide, but the slide following that. So 2 slides from now, I will show you what it looks like for a shift in supply and also a second example of shift in demand. But I want to make sure I give you guys this background before I actually show you that in graphic form. When there's a shift of supply to the right, an increase in supply, you are going to see an excess of supply, which is a surplus, like we've discussed before. So let me ask you this. If you were a producer, what would you do if you had a surplus? So if a surplus occurs, what would producers do? Put yourself in the position of a producer. What would you do? Well, if you have a warehouse or a stockroom or a refrigerator in a restaurant with a bunch of excess supply, you are going to reduce prices in order to sell those additional products. And that kind of that does make a lot of sense if you think about it. If you produce extra goods or extra items that you have in your supply room or in your warehouse or whatnot, the only real logical thing to do is to go ahead and reduce your prices to a point where you can get rid of those items. We discussed in class that there's very, very few items that actually maintain or grow in value over time. If you're in the restaurant industry, you need to get rid of those goods as soon as possible because depending on what it is you produce, they're going to go bad and spoil pretty quick. This reduction in prices creates a new market equilibrium. Again, I'm going to show you this in graphic representation in 2 slides from now, but just make sure that you guys get all this stuff down so you can compare them to the graphic representation so that you can get a clear idea of how this theory works. Now let's talk about shifts in demand. In Chapter 4, we discussed shifts in demand and we were able to draw them out by drawing an additional demand curve just like we did with our supply curves. When there is a shift in demand, If it's an increase, you're going to shift that demand curve to the right. If it's a decrease, you're going to shift the demand curve to the left. The same thing is going to occur when we're dealing with supply and demand curves. Once you shift that demand curve to the right or to the left, you're going to create a new equilibrium. If you shift this demand to the right, you are going to create a shortage. There's going to be an increased amount of demand, but supply isn't going to be moving. The only thing that's shifting is demand. So there's going to be more people wanting goods than producers are actually producing. This is when you walk into stores and you see empty shelves because there's not enough products on the shelves to keep up with customer demand. When there is an increase in demand, producers will raise the prices in order to produce more goods and really to also make more profit. But mainly, in order for them to meet the demand, the increase of demand that occurred, they need to produce more goods. And in order to produce more goods, they need to take in more revenue to buy the materials needed and to pay the workers that are needed to produce those goods. So let me give you an example to kind of clarify this. If you are producing t-shirts and you produce 50 t-shirts to satisfy the demands of 50 people, you sell your shirts for $25 a piece. Now all of a sudden people really like your shirts, so now 100 people want them. So now you have to increase your supply to meet the demands of 100 people that want your shirts. So in order to do that, you're going to go ahead and produce the shirts, take on that extra cost, and to make up the extra cost to buying the extra materials, to paying the extra workers, you're going to have to charge maybe $30 a shirt in order to make up that extra cost that took to produce 50 more t-shirts. I hope that example helps clarify this idea. A fall in demand. Now the same is true going the opposite way. When demand falls, suppliers respond by cutting prices and a new market equilibrium is also found. And this also makes a lot of sense if you think about it. If demand falls, if people do not like the product anymore and they start to buy something else, in order to entice and to bring in more customers to buy those goods, producers are going to cut prices. That makes it more appealing. A good example of this is the iPhone. Whenever there's a new iPhone that comes out, whether it's the iPhone 5 or the iPhone 5S, what have you, it makes sense for Apple to go ahead and reduce the prices of their older iPhones like the iPhone 4S, because they know that when people come into their stores, they're going to buy the newer iPhone unless they want to save money by buying the older one. If a customer comes in with $500 to buy this iPhone, it would be kind of idiotic for that person to spend $500 equal value for an older iPhone than it would be to buy the newer phone. So in order to respond to this kind of a dilemma, Apple or any producer is going to take that older item and discount it. The same happens when it comes to just basic demand falls. When demand of an item starts to lose its appeal, producers try to draw people in by lowering prices. Search cost is another thing I want to discuss before I move on to the graphic representations of the shifts of demand and the shifts of supply. This is important because I feel like we all do this and we don't really understand that sometimes when we do this, we might actually be losing money or losing out on other opportunity costs. So let me dig a little deeper. Search costs are the financial or opportunity costs consumers pay when they search for a certain good or a certain service. I know, for instance, I have an aunt that used to drive all the way across town in the Bay Area, which is pretty big distance, because she would save anywhere from 3 to 5 cents a gallon on gas by driving to one certain gas station all the way across town. she didn't really realize that depending on her, how much gas she's actually going to buy, and depending on traffic and other variables like hitting every single red light, that she might actually be paying more for her gas because she's using a lot of gas to get all the way across town. So that was a financial addition to buying that item that she didn't see. She was paying a search cost for that. Also, there's an opportunity cost lost. All that time it takes her, whether it's 20 minutes or 40 minutes, to drive across town to get that cheaper gas, that is time that she's not using on other things, like cooking or watching her favorite show, which is like Judge Judy. But she's losing that opportunity cost because she's choosing to drive that extra 45, 30 so minutes to go get that cheaper gas. So my point is when you go and you search out some of these deals, or when you go and you search out some of these specific items, be aware that there might be additional costs that you are occurring in order to get those goods or those services. All right, let's move on to the graphs. We're going to analyze shifts in supply and demand, and I have two graphs that I'm going to show you as examples. The first graph, graph A, is going to show you how a market finds a new equilibrium when there is an increase in supply. Now for this example, I use tablets. This is something that we've all seen, and if you guys really think back in the last year, you guys have personally seen this too. When tablets first came out, Apple iPad was the very first one. And when they came out, people were willing to pay $600 for this new device that they thought was pretty cool. Suppliers were able to go ahead and supply at $600. They were able to supply an output of, we'll say, 2 million iPads or tablets. But as technology advances and competition enters the market, there's a lot more supply of tablets on the market. So supply has increased. That is represented in our new supply curve. As we see, this original supply curve located here has shifted to the right, has increased supply to create this new curve. Well, this new curve creates a new intersection with our demand, which is labeled C here. And the result is more producers of tablets. Now we have Microsoft, we have Samsung, whatnot, are willing to produce tablets at a cheaper price. So now at $400, they're willing to produce tablets and to create a new equilibrium price of $400 to keep demand and consumers happy. Now let's look at graph B. Graph B is going to find a new equilibrium when there's an increase in demand. For this example, I use shorts. This is a great example for today because the weather is starting to get a lot warmer. Originally, there's an equilibrium price right here at about $25. Producers feel that at $25, if they produce 300,000 shorts, they will make enough money for it to be worth it. Consumers feel that $25 is enough for them to buy about, we'll say, an additional 300,000 shorts. But the weather is starting to get a lot warmer. When the weather gets warmer, the demand for shorts is going to increase. When the demand shifts from our original demand to our new demand, it creates a new equilibrium. Now, the new equilibrium price is $30. In order to produce these additional shorts, the producers are going to charge an additional $5, and that will make the consumers happy so they can find a nice equilibrium at 400,000 pairs of shorts. I hope these graphs were able to help you to be able to be used with the actual textual information I provided. Please review, give me feedback, watch it 1, 2, 3 times, see if it helps. but please give me feedback so we can improve our class. Thank you.